the classic toy that is adapted. It's an animal that barks and walks or oinks and walks. The best part is this one is from Five Below. Hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with my latest videos. Also, check out my website at playenabled.com for more ideas. Let's get started with what you'll need. You will need the toy, helping hands, your soldering iron, wire strippers, solder, wires, scissors, screwdriver, and heat shrink tubes. You also need a switch to test it and batteries, but I'm sure there's more I forgot. First thing is always test the toy. There's nothing more annoying than adapting a toy, it not working, and you not knowing if it's you're adapting or the toy. Alright, now you're going to open the remote. I like to do this just to see what I'm working with and to decide what type of jack I'm going to do. So once I decide on what type of jack I'm going to do, I'm going to now prepare my jack. Here's my jack. I took the outside off. Now I'm going to take my two wires, which I already cut, and I'm going to strip them. So I have another video that explains more about how to do this, so I'm just going to do it quickly. I strip it, I'm going to twist it together, and then I'm going to take my jack and feed one wire through the top. I'm going to bend it back and then twist it. This is just to give it a little extra security. It's really not going to go anywhere. You can see I pulled it. It's not going anywhere. Now I'm going to put it onto my helping hands. It takes a little bit of adjusting. So now I solder it. Add a little solder. Hold it down. I think my soldering iron might need to be cleaned, so I'll do that quickly after this. Get back out. Alright, the solder's on. It's not going anywhere. Cut a piece of my heat shrink tube. Put it on. I realized I didn't do it here, but I'll show you what I do once the tube is on to shrink it. What I'm doing now is I'm cutting off with tin shears the little things that stick out on the top, so that way the other wire doesn't rub against them. This is optional. You could cut them, you could leave them, you could fold them over, which I cover some of these in another video. Now I'm going to take my red wire, I twisted the strands together, and I'm going to put it through the small pin and bend it back on itself so it's parallel with the red casing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to twist them together. I twisted it, it's pretty tight, it's not going anywhere. So now it's time to solder. So I put it into my helping hands, and I grab my solder and my soldering iron, and I put some solder on. As I mentioned, I have another video that explains in more detail how to prepare this jack, but what I do is I put some solder onto the wire and then melt it down. I leave the soldering iron on the metal, and as I'm doing it, I pull the wire straight to make sure that it's nice and straight. So I gave it a little tug. It's pretty good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my heat shrink tube on. So I cut it down and I pull it up over the exposed wire. And then once it's up over the exposed wire, I use my lighter and I shrink it down. So I noticed that the yellow wire is a little loose, so I'm actually going to add a little bit more solder to that one and hope that I can get it more secure. There you go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cover and I can put it on. But before I do that, I like to do this, it's not necessary, is I put a larger piece of heat shrink tube and I shrink it just because it will make it a little bit more professional. So now I'm going to put on the outside. Sometimes it's hard to get the wires in, so just kind of like move it around and fit it on. Alright, twist it. There we go, my jack is ready. There's a lot of old solder, as you can see. It's not so good. So I'm going to take my switch that came with the toy, put it in my helping hands. And I'm going to use a tool. This is actually my first time using this. It is to remove excess solder. You push it in, pop it, it releases, and what it does is essentially it sucks the solder into this little nozzle. So I'm going to heat up the solder, the old solder that was on the switch that came with the toy. It takes a little while, and then once it's heated up, I just suctioned all that old solder off. Might take a few tries. Again, this is my first time doing this. Okay, this one doesn't have as much solder, but it is taking a little bit longer, a little more heat to unsolder. finally came off. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another shrink tube on my jack. So before I shrink it down, I'm actually going to move it down a little bit so that it covers over the one I already have there, so that there's no gap in coverage. And the reason I added this extra piece was because I noticed that when I put it in the toy, it kind of stuck out a little bit. So now I'm going to strip the wires again because I cut it down a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the strands of the wire and twist them together, and then thread one of the wires through the hole on the switch. Bend it over and give it a little twist. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the other wire on the other side of the switch. This one's a little bit harder because there's still a lot of old solder on it. I could have spent more time trying to get that off. I just did not for time's sake. Now I'm taking the original wires that came with the toy and I'm going to attach them in kind of the same way I did with the ones from the jack. The edge is a little bit like rough and frayed and there's like solder on it, so I'm just going to cut that off. So I stripped a little bit more. Twist it together, put it into the switch. There we go. So now the original wire from the toy is back connected to the switch the toy came with. And I have also attached my jack that will allow me to attach an outside switch. I'm going to solder them together so that they're now soldered to the toy's switch. So once all the wires are attached, I'm going to grab the remote and place the switch back into place. And what I did was I just removed the little like clip that came with it, and instead of drilling and just to save me time, I just stuck it through one of the holes that was already in the remote. So here we go. I'm going to test it with the switch. It works. Test it with the switch that came with the toy. It works. So both the jack and the toy still work. Zip tie. So this is an added step. Zip tie or hot glue. Essentially what this is going to do is if there's any yanking on the jack, it's going to secure the wires into place and hopefully stop the jack from being pulled off from the toy. We know that switches fall, it might yank the jack, the kids might pull it. It happens. This is just an added security. Again, you can do just even a dot of hot glue. If you notice, a lot of kids' toys actually have hot glue inside to keep things together. So I put it in, make sure it's closing. There we go, it still works, okay. I did have a little bit of trouble when I was trying to close it, just had to reposition some of the wires. Now it's perfect. I'm going to close it up, put the screws back in, screw it closed. You'll see that there is still one hole. You can cover that up with tape or like again a little bit of hot glue. There we go, it works. And you see there's the red hook that came with it. I just didn't put it back in. If you like what you saw, hit the subscribe button down below and check out my website at playenabled.com for more information on how to adapt this product, including a different way to adapt it, as well as other products.